This podcast is for information purposes only and is not and should not be construed as professional advice or an offer or commitment by any Rabobank group member to enter into a transaction. The views expressed by the presenter and or guest are their own and do not necessarily represent the views of Rabobank. Please see the podcast description for our full disclaimer. Welcome to Rabo Talks Growing Our Future, where we talk to experts from both here in New Zealand and across the world to bring New Zealand farmers and growers the information they need to make informed, strategic decisions about the future direction of their business to ensure they continue to thrive in a fast-changing world. Farmers today aren't short on data, they're surrounded by it. From satellite imagery and soil sensors to virtual fencing and AI-driven insights, the tools are here. But are we using them to their full potential? And what does it take to ensure that agri-tech not only boosts productivity, but also supports sustainability, resilience and animal welfare? I'm your host, Katie Rodwell, and today we're joined by Brendan O'Connell, the CEO of Agri-Tech New Zealand, who is the best placed person to speak to this topic. Together, we'll unpack what agri-tech really means for farmers on the ground, how it's shaping our unique farming systems, and what it will take to make New Zealand a global hub for agricultural innovation. Brendan, thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to Growing Our Future podcast. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you, Katie.
Brendan, today we're going to be discussing all things agri-tech. Before we do that, I would love for you to introduce yourself and just give us a bit of insight into who you are and your career to date.
Great, thanks, Katie. So obviously I'm Chief Executive of Agri-Tech New Zealand, and my career started with a mechanical engineering degree and then getting into the world of product development. So I've been involved in product development since I first started work, so originally in a biomedical engineering company. And I've been involved in mechanical design, and then that led on to R&D management, sort of project management and R&D management with various companies. I came to the Southern Hemisphere at the end of the 90s. So in 98, I started working for Nokia mobile phones in their design center in Sydney, which was a great time. And I left them in 99 to come over to New Zealand. I always say that everything went downhill for Nokia as soon as I left. But that'd be misclaiming it slightly. Came to New Zealand fully with the intent of heading back to Ireland, and then happened to meet a Hawke's Bay girl and also feel more at home in New Zealand than I had done anywhere else outside of Ireland. And so now I've been here for 26 years. In work-wise, in New Zealand, I continued to work as R&D manager for Navman in Auckland. And then in 2006, I joined a business called TrueTest, so Auckland-based agri-tech business. And that was my entry into agri-tech as a sector. And for me, it was really interesting because, like lots of people who work in agri-tech, I found it really easy to get that sense of affinity with what the purpose of the technology is, for doing technology and innovation solutions for something like food systems and for working with farmers and growers. I hadn't really felt that in my career since I'd moved away from the biomedical space. So I'd worked in lots of interesting sectors, done some really cool technology, did all sorts of cool technology with Navman in the marine space, or with Nokia in the sort of consumer electronics, telecommunications space. And loved the technologies there, but it never really quite gelled as with a sense of purpose. And yet agri-tech, and I've talked to people in agri-tech quite a bit about this, and I think a lot of people, it is definitely the combination of technology and agriculture that genuinely attracts and has people sticking with the sector. You can find other technologies in other spaces, but to find it being used for food production is really easy to identify with. So that's something I definitely identify with. So now I've been in the sector for 18, going on 19 years. my time at TrueTest was as R&D manager, and then in business development, and then I've been involved in many other businesses, both in Europe and in New Zealand in the agri-tech space. And for the last 5 years, the role that I've done in sort of building business relationships from within companies sort of led on to being involved in this role of leading an industry association like Agritech New Zealand.
Amazing. What an interesting career. It seems like even you saying the word Nokia, it sort of seems so old school now. Even though it's not even that long ago we had Nokias. I was sort of like, oh, I haven't heard that name in a while.
It was cutting edge at the time.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. I loved it.
Okay, so could you just give us maybe a bit of context as to what Agritech New Zealand does? And that will then lead us into what Agritech actually is. Because I sort of want to start there and not make the assumption that people actually understand what we mean by Agritech.
Yeah, so briefly saying who we are, we're an industry association that's funded by our members. And our role there is to look at connecting and creating a sense of identity across all of the different skills and interests that are required to developing and bringing new technologies into life on farms and orchards. So our role as an industry group is to create that sense of connection, to promote the sector, to promote what the role of agritech is, to promote what it means to be as part of the community, and then to look at ways of collectively advancing the sector. So that it means that we will do advocacy work with government. We will maintain relationships and partnerships with groups who have similar interests overseas. And when you look at our community, so the people that are involved in agritech, it involves the agritech businesses. That's about 52% of our community. But the other 48% of the community is everyone else who has stakes in seeing new practices, new behaviors, and new capabilities emerge through our growing systems, both here and overseas. So that includes a lot of the research and educational groups, so the universities and now the PROs. It includes large agribusinesses who would see agritech as either something that they want to see in the hands of their farmers and growers, especially if they are cooperatives, but also often they need the data or the insights that is enabled through agritech to run their own operations or come into their own operations, and more they're looking at agritech as something that they want to actively invest in or maybe distribute. So a lot of different relationships there from larger agribusinesses, so the Fonterras, the Silver Fern Farms, the Zesprys, the Farmlands, LICs, and organisations.
Yeah, okay.
Organisations like that.
Okay. And so, what does agritech encompass? I mean, obviously it's big, but just like, what would the summary be of what agritech encompasses?
Yeah, so it is wide. It'll probably be shorter to tell you what it doesn't encompass.
Yeah, okay, let's do that.
And of course, those definitions, different groups will define things differently depending on their particular circumstance or their particular interests. From our perspective, when we look at it from what's happening in New Zealand and what New Zealand is making a mark globally, we define agritech as physical, digital, or biological solutions. So there's already quite a variety in that definition. And then, yes, it gets applied mostly over land uses. There are a lot of technology affinities with areas like aquaculture, particularly where aquaculture comes to land. But for our definitions, we look at sort of land-based activities. So that it does include, livestock systems, horticulture, viticulture, apiculture, arable, and all of those areas. So it's quite a broad definition in those sort of sector pieces.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of commonality across all of those applications.
Yeah.
And where there are adjacencies, those adjacencies end up being very important.
Okay. So I'm just trying to narrow things down. No, not narrow things down because I can't narrow it down because it is a big scope. But what does it actually mean? Like, what does agritech do to benefit on the day-to-day operations? Like, what would you, if you had to do an elevator pitch, what would you say?
Well, agri-tech is about enabling new behaviors on farms. So it's ultimately it's a set of tools that can be used for greater insights and greater control over variabilities. That can be used for improved productivity, better environmental outcomes, better outcomes when there are labour challenges, a better standard of life when in terms of what do farmers and growers actually spend their time doing. And again, I know that's quite a broad definition, but it's the reality of the range of solutions, the range of tools that are being brought onto orchards and farms around the world that sort of fall into the definition of agri-tech.
Yeah.
Really, it's sort of it's innovative behavior. I guess there's a focus on tools and capabilities, be they physical or digital, and they're enabling new behaviors that arise as food systems need to adapt.
Okay. What would be some tangible benefits to farmers or growers that they could see from adopting agri-tech on farm?
So let's think through a couple of examples, maybe.
Okay.
And go through those, because there's multiple benefits. You can think of in New Zealand, obviously pasture farming is what drives a large part of our farming practices in our economy.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can look at new businesses like Aimer Technology, which is taking practices around pasture walks with plate meters and improving them with AI technology, artificial intelligence technology, based from a phone, which now gives farmers far quicker and greater insight into what are the pasture covers ahead of them. What that means to farmers, of course, is better pasture utilization, but also just changing the nature of the jobs that needs to be done. There's many other examples like that. Again, Halter is a business that has been in the news quite a bit for some very good reasons, because they've got a real vision for how farming can change, and they've been able to raise the capital to really execute that in a really compelling way. And so they're enabling far greater levels of both insight and control over what happens on farm. That means, bottom line effects, such as, greater returns from the farm. So, improved milk solids in dairy, improved live weight gains, when it comes to red meat. So those practical outcomes, but it also means that it's changing the nature of what farmers are doing on the land. It's giving them new choices around how they can make those productivity decisions, and get those productivity outcomes, but also what they spend their time doing, because it's removing mundane tasks and putting more time back into farmers' hands for hopefully having a better quality of life and spending time with family and having a more balanced life, but also being more strategic around what do they spend their time actually doing on farm, rather than just, getting some of the jobs done, actually being able to think about what is the purpose of this next job and where does that fit. So it really changes the nature of farming. It also, it creates agri-tech in general, will make visible variabilities that might not be visible through other ways.
What's an example of that like?
Well, again, just being able to see different levels of land performance, different levels of animal performance across a group, and exposing the variability that the group is not homogeneous, it might not even be a normal distribution, and that you can start spotting what those variabilities are and acting on them. So I guess you're getting into the domain of what has, previously been called, and it's still a term that's used, precision agriculture, or the idea of, not working on averages, exposing what the variables are and then acting on those variables to be able to get better outcomes.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Brendan, what would you say, you might not know the answer to this, but what percentage of farmers have adopted agri-tech in some form? Like what,
All of them.
Yeah, okay, because it's such a broad...
Because, yeah, and I'm sorry, yeah, so that might not be a useful answer for you. You know, it very, of course, you know, agri-tech includes, you know, electric fencing, you know, which is very widely used. Agri-tech includes, of course, farm management and business management tools.
Yeah,
so
okay.
the farm accounting packages like Figured and Farm Focus, or the farm management packages like Farm IQ and Trev and Resolution, and you know,
Yeah,
all
okay.
of the um, and so there is a difference in adoption. You know, so we did some research work back in 2022 on levels of adoption across different technology types, and there's very high levels of adoption around business management tools, because either farmers or their advisors probably, you know, will have farm accounting and some level of farm management tools sitting in a digital platform somewhere.
Yeah.
So there's very high adoption of those type of pieces. In New Zealand, around animal management, particularly because of our of NATE and OSPREY and our animal traceability scheme, we've got quite a high level of adoption of animal identification and tools that fit around that, weighing systems and other things. Where there was less adoption, or you know, is around environmental management. Now that's changing significantly, but historically that has not been as prevalent as we're seeing now, and so there's a shift towards looking at a wider range of things, whether that includes variable rate applications across various things, whether that's around soil monitoring, moisture monitoring, whether that's around water quality monitoring. Those are the areas which currently are adopted less than in some other areas. This is based on the data back in 2022, but is seeing an increased rate of adoption as there are different requirements coming through for farms to both control and report what's happening across their systems.
Yeah, okay. You've really highlighted my lack of depth of knowledge of agri-tech, because I always sort of thought of it as like just physical technology that you bring onto the farm, but talking about, like, you know, even business software tools and that sort of thing being under agri-tech. Yeah, it's interesting.
There are. I mean, it's. Yeah, that sort of digital combination, the physical tools, obviously enabling tasks to be done, and the best, you know, you look at examples of those across many different systems. You look at what's you know, some really exciting companies like Smart Machine Oxen or Robotics Plus, you know, that are doing, you know, that are, you know, complex pieces of machinery doing tasks on farm. But of course, to enable that in an automation sense, you know, you're doing that with knowledge of what's being applied, where you are, and so you're creating a natural data flow just from those physical devices or physical tools that you might think of.
Yeah.
And then it's all the data and insights that come out of that start layering a whole new understanding of what's actually happening in this system, and what are my opportunities to get a deeper insight on top of my lived experience as a farmer and grower, but to bring now a layer of knowledge and measurement on top of that that hasn't been as common in the past, and it does change things quite fundamentally.
Yeah, it's super interesting because, you know, you think about farmers and they're very astute at knowing, you know, weather and animal conditions and productivity and like all these numbers and stuff that probably sit in their head and just in books and over generations. And then all of a sudden you start bringing in tools that can show them the data. And yeah, it's probably just more an observation of me. It must just be really interesting to see behavior changes and strategic, you know, changes in that strategic decision-making based on that data.
It is really interesting because it's not actually that big a leap or that big a change. I mean, it is enabling some I guess things that you would label as transformations and, you know, significantly new evolutions of capability. But as you call out, farmers and growers have actually been very measured and knowledge driven forever. That particularly, I mean, New Zealand is particularly good at it because our farmers and growers are very professionally minded, and they have been for a long time, and so they have been data driven. That data may have been from written notes.
Yeah.
That data may have been from almost, the data of memories
Yeah,
a lot of the time, or
conversations around the table.
lived experience. Conversation's really important. You're right. There's great knowledge sharing amongst farmers and between their advisors, and there always has been. Farmers have also been. They've always been natural experimenters. It's been really interesting to see, that they'll try something new in a season, and they'll do it in a relatively controlled manner. They'll say, "Well, I'm gonna try this fodder crop, and I'm gonna do it over here, and I'm gonna change my genetics up, and I'm gonna do this." And so they've always had a sort of an experimental, exploratory mindset, because you need to do that in farming. It's how you keep things going. A lot of the new tools and technologies that are coming out are just giving them new ways of doing that at a supercharged level, or a new level of capability.
Yeah.
But it matches quite well. I think there's a real sort of pragmatism to farming that makes technology something that is it's judged. I don't know. Skeptical isn't the right way. So a sort of a pragmatic approach. So it's just it needs to do the job it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brendan, what barriers do you see to agri-tech adoption in New Zealand?
So there's a fair few barriers out there. Again, this is part of the work that we did in 2022. So there are challenges. There are challenges around affordability. There are challenges around integration, and there are challenges around just finding the right fit for the right farmer sometimes as well. So there's that's like any group, farmers are not a homogenous group. There's lots of different skills, lots of different capabilities, and so it's just finding the right sort of tools for the right sort of system and the right sort of farmer at different times. In terms of affordability, technology development is like many other businesses. It takes a fair investment to create agri-tech, particularly physical tools, and in order to get a return on that investment, you need to look at having the right sort of market size. So there's just sort of actual sort of economic dynamics, which makes puts a price on agri-tech, and that price is often determined by, well, what's the market size?
Yeah.
Now, agriculture has a limited market size in New Zealand, even though it's a great market for adoption, which is why you see so many agri-tech businesses in New Zealand now. They're using New Zealand as exactly the right place to be bringing technologies out and getting farmers to have benefit for them, and they're able to invest more in those technologies than the New Zealand market size might justify. In other words, you couldn't right size those to that level of investment for the number of potential customers in the New Zealand market. But because they're thinking globally and they're taking these technologies globally, they're able to invest more, bring better technologies forward, and bring them overseas.
Yeah.
But from a barrier point of view, it's trying to find the right point that that there is affordability for those tools, and that they fit into the type of behaviour changes that need to happen on farm.
And what about? Sorry, I just interrupted you. Did you have something else to say?
I was just going to add one other comment on some of the other barriers. Integration is often mentioned as a barrier because, and normally it happens that a farmer or grower is using one piece of technology, and if that technology doesn't speak to other pieces of technology, then there's a barrier there, or there's a lock-in to a particular piece of technology. I think we've seen globally and in New Zealand. that we've been at a point where that's come to a real pain point, and it's been changing over the last while. So there's more integration between systems now than there ever has been before. And that's not to say that people won't have experiences today that demonstrate that there isn't interoperability, as they'd call it, or integration between systems. But those experiences are happening less and less, and I would say that in a period as short as 5 years, so 5 seasons, that will have dissipated from being an issue almost very significantly.
Yeah, I'll quote you on that, Brendan, because it's often what you hear. Like on the ground, it's the biggest frustration is just like, how can we get all of these tools to talk to each other? And I think farmers look at industry and just say, like, what are you up to? Like, why can't you get these things to work together so we're not inputting data 5 times in different places? So it's good to hear that, you think that in the next sort of 5 years that will hopefully be not something that we're talking about so much anymore.
There's more change on integration in the last 2 years than there has been, within any period beforehand. So there's the levels, and I'm talking specifically here in New Zealand.
Yeah, okay.
The New Zealand dairy industry is a very mature industry. It's a mature industry from a technology perspective. And so there are a lot of solutions out there that have not been talking to each other. And so when groups like Fonterra look at the importance of being able to report on what's happening on farm to various parts of their value chain, they see the requirement for that just growing. They need to provide more and more information to capture more and more value across the value chain and to keep those markets open. So, they've turned around and go, well, we know that to support our farmers and their profitability, we need data to support that. And yet, if that's a pain, if those costs, the activities in order to be able to do that. So, if you put the word sort of compliance around that and say that the data you need to provide is a compliance cost. Fonterra turned around internally and said they want to remove 1 million hours of compliance out of the system. Now, the way that you do that is the integrations. Yeah. That, if the data exists, you don't ask for it to be re-entered again. You just make sure that the data comes across, with all the right permissions and all the right controls, but the data becomes available. And so that has driven, major change, both in attitude and in actual technical capabilities to enable more data exchange. And I think we've hit a tipping point where, we're just going to see that cascading and happening more and more.
Yeah. And so the increase in the need for integration, or the priority of integration, has actually come because the likes of Fonterra and stuff can see the value that they get of sharing that data. So they've said, like, right, we need to make sure that we've got that readily available so that we can add value at the other end, or capture value at the other end.
That's right. Data is becoming, a fuel for value. It's enabling proof of claims. It's enabling, market attributes, and proving that what we do is genuinely different to other food systems, and capturing value on that. And so you need data and insights to prove that, and that's becoming more and more required. And so people have recognised that there's to pull those bits of information together to support those claims and to be able to do that. We can't have that as a burden. That needs to flow from existing systems. Now that's non-trivial. Technically, it's very possible technically, but it's taken those sort of motivations that the reporting it can bring value. The reporting is needed. The reporting needs data in controlled ways. So let's not make it an additional task. Let's look at how data that already exists in different systems can be repurposed in an appropriate way for those type of reportings. Yeah. We've seen lots of good examples of that.
And so do you think, when do you think that value will end up at the farm gate? If you think from a farmer's perspective, they're the ones adopting the technologies and putting that data and stuff. Well, when do they see that value in their pockets? Or are they already getting it? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, really good question. So, I can't answer for all system
Yeah.
structures and relationships. I can say, of course, by optimizing, what happens on farm, farmers should be able to release, but just from current practice, be able to release better value for themselves, and
Yeah.
that's appropriate. There should be a responsibility there. There should be a capability there, and good farmers have been doing that for generations, and they've now got new tools to go even further with that. So, plenty of examples of them creating better outcomes within the current system. I think you're exactly right, though. There are a lot of value chain requirements for information off farm, and there's value being created for those things throughout the value chain. And it's appropriate that farmers shouldn't have to bear all of the costs to enable that without getting the benefits. So we see the benefits, and I think there's always a tension here. And it's a tension that comes down to all of the value decisions. I'm just grateful in New Zealand we have farm cooperatives, which do make sure that farmers are in a good position, unlike some other markets where, and you talk a lot more about retailers than you do about cooperatives. But you're right. There are benefits to some of these behavior changes on farm that are resting across the value chain. There is reward for those benefits. There are premium contracts. There are better payouts based on some of the capabilities enabled by those things. And yet, personally, I believe that technology might be able to unlock ways of, bringing some of the downstream benefits from changes on farm and allow some of those benefits to come back to farm. So, the two ways that I've mentioned right now are very direct.
Yeah.
Just optimizations on farm, better business, more profitability, better outcomes. And that should be the first thing that happens. Better contracts. Yep, that's happening. That's good. The idea of, I know in some countries, and Brazil in particular, they're trying to look at ways of, if there is additional value created from farm insights off farm, that there should be methodologies to make sure that some of the benefits for that rest back on farm. Technically technically and system-wise difficult to achieve, but I think that's sort of what you're considering in your question. Yeah.
Halter's billion-dollar valuation is obviously captured global attention, and we talked about it a little bit earlier. From your perspective, what does this represent for New Zealand's agri-tech kind of sector? Like, what does that mean for us?
So that's my favorite question so far, Katie. So Halter, as you know, were valued at US $1 billion in the same week that the Alliance Group was valued at 500 million New Zealand dollars. So factor of 3 in different valuations. Now, as I've said, in other forums, they're very different valuation methods. So it's very unfair comparison to say that Halter, a single agri-tech business, is worth 3 times a red meat cooperative group. Very different valuation methods, but I think it is indicative of what agri-tech can mean to New Zealand. When Halter have set a vision for what they believe can change in agriculture, and they've found investors who believe in them and believe in the vision and have funded them to go and make that true. And they're doing a really excellent job of making that true. Some really exciting news for how things are going for them in the States recently. And they're making really good progress by raising that amount of money to be able to develop the business and develop the solutions that they're doing. There's no reason why New Zealand can't produce a Halter of horticulture, a Halter of aquaculture. We have New Zealand is the natural place for an organisation like Halter to come out of. If it wasn't for Craig Piggott, his relationship with Peter Beck from Rocket Labs as sort of the gestation point, and then the team that Craig from Halter has put together, it's natural that New Zealand would be involved in creating a business like that. We've done it many times before in different ways. When you look at a business like Gallagher that's been around for 80 years and is a global player in terms of the systems that they're doing. New Zealand is actually really good at doing this, and we can do it again and again. So, to answer your question of what does the valuation of Halter mean for New Zealand and New Zealand agriculture, I would say that there is potential for agri-tech to be a bigger contributor to the New Zealand economy than the dairy sector. And there's nothing to hinder that, or at least the things that would have to be overcome to achieve that are very achievable, and they have a different set of constraints than access to land, which we require to grow grass or to grow kiwi fruit or to grow apples or to grow anything. So I think the combination of sort of what we grow and how we grow it, what are the technologies and systems we use, has massive potential for New Zealand. And so, yeah.
Do you think
$1 billion?
Do you think there's appetite for that? Because, obviously before talking to you, I did a bit of research and stuff about agri-tech. Obviously not enough because it was so broad, but that was something that I was thinking, is that surely this is a sector that we could grow and have as one of our, like the dairy sector and the sheep and beef. The agri-tech sector seems like a really obvious choice, considering the natural adoption. We talked about earlier how farmers naturally can adopt ideas and they're innovative and stuff. So it seems like a really good place for us to do that. But do you think there's sort of appetite for that?
Oh, I think there's demand and inevitability to it. Yeah. It's not just appetite. And so, but it's not a straight path. You can find. There'll be a range of different. Different levels of readiness, different opinions, different levels of capability. It's not a straight path. But you look at you look at challenges that we've got around food systems globally. Those challenges need a response. Yeah. And the response to those challenges is innovation and new ways of doing things. And in agriculture, that's the definition of agri-tech. Yeah. It's enabling a response to more varied weather conditions. Yeah. It's a response to trying to find sustainable value in markets around the world. It's a response to trying to keep farms productive and profitable so that the next generation can come on and have livelihoods on those farms. Yeah. And so I think there's appetite for all of those things. Yeah. And therefore there's an appetite for agri-tech.
And obviously global investments readily kind of available if you've got the right pitch and that sort of thing.
Yes, I think New Zealand has a challenge sometimes because of its isolation, and so that's why you see Halter needing to go to overseas markets to find capital. Yeah. But we work as part of a global economy, and so the opportunity for any New Zealand business to tap into capital, I think is very achievable. There isn't a lack of capital. There's just a demand for more investable ideas.
Yeah, interesting. I'll just wrap up and just say, Brendan, thank you so much for sharing your insights. I've certainly learned a lot, even just in our short conversation. So thank you for sharing, your perspective on the future of the agri-tech sector and just kind of the opportunities that we have in New Zealand in the sector. I do like to finish my podcast with probably the curliest question you're going to have today, Brendan. And what is your favourite work lunch?
My favourite work lunch.
Yeah. Or what have you bought for lunch today that might be easier?
My favourite work lunch is just any lunch that I can have where I'm sitting quietly.
Nice. I love that. That's so good. Brendan, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast today.
Likewise, Katie. Really, really good to have the discussion, and I look forward to more.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to Rabo Talks Growing Our Future podcast. If you're interested in learning more about how Rabobank can support you to succeed into the future, please go to rabobank.co.nz.